I used to be a brother. Now I'm a sister. It's as big as I can. Okay. Water. Okay. And yeah, for anyone joining in more recently, or if you're just not familiar, if you want your own poems read on the stream, you can do !submit, and that will allow you to send me things to read. So, Asher, comfortable with YouTube? And do you want critique or just analysis? It kind of just depends on what I end up doing, honestly. I don't always choose. And do you have any context or notes that is not explanation beforehand? Yes, everything. Wonderful. Take a number 1 with everything on it. Not going to spend too much time on this one, to be quite honest, or not as much time. I don't think I have another hour and a half of analysis, but like 45 minutes, I think we can do that. And then I'm going to like play Magic the Gathering or something nonsensical. Or just draw. Calligraphy. Who knows? Anyway, brother. His hand... I need to read it like a normal person. His hand touched mine. Hot blood melted our skin into one flesh. Now we were bound forever. Nothing could break us. Ooh, no blood promise. Except her. I don't hate her or you. Well, maybe I do you, but certainly not her. The one who took you from me. Left me for months and years, even now, without you. You've got to sleep after this? Okay. You don't call or write or even try to be my friend unless you want something. Even then, I come running like a dog waiting for his master's return. It's pathetic. I'm pathetic. Still thinking of that boy who put his hand to mine and said you will never have to be alone again. How you lie. That's all you do to me now. All you have ever done, most lightly. I was just too blinded by the thought of being someone's. I never wanted us to be together. I just wanted you to acknowledge our bond and what we did that day. How you told me. Now we are each other's forever. It was probably just another lie. But it is better to live a happy life. Is it better to live a happy lie or a depressed reality? And when I became too much of a reality, you chose her. You broke our bond and you chose her. So don't come crawling back to me whenever you please. Because I know your hand is healed, but is still bleeding. Cool stuff. Cool stuff. But mine is still bleeding? Is that what it's supposed to be? Yeah, if you have any edits, feel free to provide. Yeah. No worries. My hand. You don't always get the chance to correct your work if it has mistakes in it for your audience. Not that your work has to be perfect because you're in chat, but if you're sharing stuff, Sometimes you don't get it corrected. Make sure your stuff is correct. And is there was another word. That's all you do to me now, all you have ever done most lightly. Is that supposed to say likely? I mean, like, lightly is, it works, it's interesting, it's poetic. It's just, like, not normal. That's me being lazy and not editing well. Yeah, I do the same. My stuff's really bad. So. Brother. His hand touched mine. Hot blood melted our skin into one flesh. Now we were bound forever. Nothing could break us. Also, sorry, could you change my hand, but mine is still bleeding? Yep. That's cool. Works in progress. I mean, everything's a work in progress until it's published. So, nothing could break us except her. I don't hate her or you. Oops. Well, maybe I do you, but certainly not her. The one who took you from me, left me for months and years, even now without you. The one who took you from me left me for months and years, even now without you. You don't call or write or even try to be my friend unless you want something. Even then I come running like a dog, waiting for his master to return. It's pathetic. I'm pathetic. Still thinking of that boy who put his hand to mine and said, "You will never have to be alone again." How you lie. That's all you do to me now. All you've ever done, most likely. I was just too blinded by the thought of being someone's. I never wanted us to be together. I just wanted you to acknowledge our bond and what we did that day. How you told me, now we are each other's forever. It was probably just another lie. But is it better to live a happy lie or a depressed reality? And when I became too much of a reality, you chose her. You broke our bond and you chose her. So don't come crawling back to me whenever you please, because I know your hand is healed, but mine is still bleeding. So you have a lot of ideas running throughout. You have the idea of her, you have the idea of the lie, you have all of the things referencing sort of bodily harm, right? Which almost blinded is similar. And then you have the dog master metaphor, which I think is cool. And you have crawling there, and you have, where's the dog part? sad, pathetic, come running, right? So I mean, yeah, like interpretation-wise, it seems fairly literal in terms of storytelling, right? We have you, and we had this other person, he, and you all made a like blood pact. Cool, awesome, blood. And then he went and he broke it and went and is now with another girl. Sad times. Very sad times. Mystery Mochi, hello and welcome. So, and of course, it's this is a very common dynamic you see in real life and in stories, is this idea of, you know, going and finding someone else, coming back only when you need, only being a friend when you don't have, like, a lover, that kind of thing. I've had people do this to me. I've probably been guilty of this to other people. I'm no saint. You are not watching a saint. You're watching twitch.tv/2/3lotus. Two-thirds of perfection. His hand touched mine. So then it's the question of, like, how do we do this most effectively? I like the use of prose here, honestly. I think, you know, that gives this feeling of, like, storytelling, where you could write this a different way. You could say something like, two hands, one, let's do some formatting. I'm just gonna write a poem. One flesh. What did you say? Always? Our forever. Never alone. Right? And then you just say, like, her and her, you, us, I. I can even throw in a rhyme. Where does my hate lie? The one who lied. Right? This is a way you could write this poem. It's very, like, poetic, very whatever. And I mean, to be quite honest, I don't like this that I just wrote, because I think the prose works much better. It explains more, it's showing this scene, you have great imagery, you have, let's do another thing, hot blood. You have, hand to mine, mine is still bleeding. Okay, so maybe less so. I was gonna say, I mean, so you provide very good imagery, and I think that can also be strengthened, because the best part of prose is it lets us show beautiful scenes in a way that the most abstract poetry does not. Right, the thing that I wrote is taking a completely different direction. Two hands, one flesh, our forever, never alone, her, you, us, I, where does my hate lie, the one who lied, right? That doesn't tell the same beautiful scene that this does, right? And that is something that we want to lean into if we're writing prose poetry. How do we tell this scene better? I think there are ways to do that. I don't think you need to tell the scene better. I think this is excellent. But so I notice a few things, right? You have this idea of the dog running. You do use it twice. You call back to it. I don't know if you need it more, but it's a cool metaphor. Of course, because dogs have this idea of loyalty, potentially honesty, but then there's also the idea of control. You know, in a sense, you might add to this metaphor. You might say that he is her dog. I mean, you said you hate him. Maybe you wouldn't go as far as saying that, but he belongs to her now, not you. And maybe you want that. You want to belong to each other. This person has left, they've lied, they've been disloyal, broken a bond. That's something you can do. There are probably lots more ways to dig into, like, the dog metaphor that would be, you know, great for this poem. You also have the idea of lies, which you use sporadically in this section. And I like this. Like I say, you lie. Just another lie. Is it better to live a happy lie? You know, that word clearly stings, I think. It is a sting to it. Because whenever you have, like, a promise, and that promise, all of this, bound forever, all of this dialogue, every time you say lie, just sort of, like, puts an axe in all of this in a very beautiful way. And of course, you could lean into it more or less. You know, you could be at a point where you're saying lie every other word, and each time it just feels like a dagger going back into your hand. That's actually, like, a really good line that I just said. Every lie, like, reopens the wound, right? But I mean, this feels like it's very balanced in a wonderful way. You have a good balance between talking about lies and spending time talking about her, but also talking about him, and also talking about yourself, and another metaphor of the dog, and the bleeding, and all of the bodily sort of existences that we have, right? And all I would say is that makes none of these ideas particularly, like, the focus of the poem, right? You're telling a story, and you tell us the story through a bunch of these metaphors, and that's great. That is, like, the focus, that's the subject. But maybe you could lean in to one of these metaphors more and have it take up more space. Or weave the metaphors into other places, right? The one who you took from me left me for months or years, even now, without you. You don't call or write or even try to be my friend unless you want something, right? Like, that's a line. You don't call or write or even try to be my friend unless you want something. That's basically just regular dialogue. And you're just saying this to this person. I'm not saying you should be putting it in quotes, but I'm just using those for an example. And you could inject one of these ideas into it. You don't call or write or even try to be my friend unless you... Well, let's say we want to lean into some of the more physical, touch, five senses storytelling elements. You could say, unless you want to hear something from me. That is better than something, I would say. Or you don't call or write or even try to be my friend unless you want something. Um, you don't call it right, and any attempt to be my friend I see as a lie, or I see through the lie, right? That kind of thing. That's why you could tie those into like your more innocuous, just like straight up prose sentences, right? Prose just means like normal writing that you would see in a book. Dialogue, writing, I mean, dialogue isn't prose, but whatever. And you have a question, right? When you write prose poetry, it's an axis. I talk about graphs a lot, right? And I mean, some people might say, okay, well, prose poetry is something that splits the difference. But like, what is splitting the difference? You know, some people say prose poetry is poetry with just a little bit of prose sprinkled in. Some people say that prose poetry is prose that has some poeticness to it. For example, we read the prose poetry of who is this from? What's the username? I'm really bad at usernames. Mellow and Tears, right? And this, I was saying, sort of feels like prose with some beautiful poetry included and some poetic qualities of the prose. And then your choice as a poet, in this case, as a prose poet, is saying, where do I want to be? Right? Because you can be in any of these places and probably still justify it as being prose poetry. I mean, you know, some people might call this, if it's a short work, more in the style of being a vignette. You know, some people might talk about narrative poetry, or whatever. But right now, I feel like you are, I would say you're leaning to the prose side right now. You have some great things, you know, included. Some very poetic lines, some very beautiful things. You do some things that are diverging from the conventions of prose. Doing things like a bold her isn't really something you see in just prose, and that is moving you away from prose and toward poetry. It's just a matter of where you want to land. And do you feel like this is poetic enough, or do you want it more poetic, or do you feel it's too poetic and you want it less poetic? I personally want it more poetic because I've seen your poetry and I think you write poetic things very beautifully, right? So like that's the question that you have to answer for yourself. I say that a lot. You have to answer for yourself. Also, I really like that I came up with this based on your poem. And if we do want it more poetic, I mean, I have lots of recommendations. First of all, you could play more with it being prose. Move a little bit further away from actually being like prose, and just being like words. I think the bold hers are interesting. You could underline every time you say his, you know? That's something. I mean, I don't know. You can use italics and strike-throughs. I think having strike-through is really cool, right? In fact, if you wanted to talk about lies, you don't even need to say how you lie here. You will never have to be alone again. If you want to express that as like this poetic prose, just format it with a strike-through. That's kind of cool. I don't know. Like, poetic prose doesn't need to be prose or poetry that looks like prose. It can be prose that looks a little more like poetry, or prose that looks a little funky, or prose that sounds a little poety, or poetry that sounds a little more like prose. And you can mix that up throughout the poem, right? That's your choice. But to be fair, you could have more quotes from this blood brother, if you will, or blood pact brother, or whatever. And have more quotes and strike them through. I just like that idea. That's something I'm latching on to, but you don't have to do that, right? There's an ad break in a moment, so I'll talk about more things, but Asher, if you have any other... I'm going to talk more about this. I'm going to talk about this for a while now, actually, because I'm inspired. Because your work is inspiring. But if you have other things that you want to ask, feel free to come up with those questions now. On the ad break, which is a self-care ad break, which means everybody is going to stand up and stretch and drink water and get snacks and go to the bathroom and do whatever you need to do. And not look at your screen. Army ants will never get me. Hello and welcome. According to my thing, the ad is over. Which means we are back to Arsonasher's brother. A wonderful little poem we have here. Poetic prose. So, we've talked about in poetry before abstraction and groundedness and the five senses and stuff like that. And generally, in my opinion, the five senses are sort of a prose thing. I mean, like, yes, we should be using them in our poetry if we're trying to describe scenes, but sometimes right, poetry can just be floating clouds of words that don't really do anything, don't describe anything, and they're just there. And I think having a solid, like, foundation in describing everything Like, I think really, if you took this to the extreme, and everything that you said, or that you were describing everything someone was experiencing, you would lean a lot closer to prose than poetry, in my opinion. By, like, straightforwardly describing sensory information, right? And I think that's one way that you can, like, lean into the advantages of prose. And you say, like, hot blood melted our skin into one flesh. I think this is a lovely line. And I want more lines like this. I want more lines that talk about your actual interactions, and your five senses, and the things that make all of this feel really real, right? So that's like a thing. So you put red box around the non-bold hers. I want to mention that the bold her is when you hate her, the unbold is when you don't. I see. So you hate her again at the end. Interesting. I like that. And I think in that case, use her more. We talked about this last stream. Patterns. You use her 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 5 times, right? And we talked about how 3 makes a pattern. Talked about this for like 45 minutes yesterday on stream. I think it was when you were gone, Asher. But if you have something appear twice in a story, in a piece of writing, in a piece of music, it's not really a pattern. And I'll show you. Let's say we're writing a poem. And I format my lines. So we have something that looks like this, 2 lines. And then we have 2 more lines. What comes next? You could say that this comes next, right? Like, it does follow what you're doing. But there's nothing really, like, enforcing in my head that I can't do something different. Like, this doesn't feel like a problem. It just means, we were doing something different here. But as soon as I add the 3rd one, it just feels like, okay, now we have consistency, we have a pattern, and we want to keep doing it, right? So then if I put something, it just feels like it keeps going. And a better example is if I do this, okay, with some interesting alignment. Left align, line indented, right? You could put something in the middle for balance. You could repeat this. You have so many options here. But let's say I do line indent, line indent, line indent. I've created a pattern. And now it feels really obvious how our brain wants to finish it, right? So that is to say, if you use her in bold 3 times, having her non-bold only twice can feel like this is a mistake in the pattern, more so than a intentional decision. So you could almost fix this by just adding one more her in lowercase. Certainly an option. You can use them both throughout more often. I think you could even make that an important part of the poem. Going back and forth between, her for some, and then going to regular her. It's very bold. But, like her, and then her for a little while later, and then, some other lowercase, and then having like her. It's interesting, right? And to be fair, you could like bolster this pattern and this convention by doing the same with his. You do say, you know, I don't hate her or you. Well, maybe I do you. Right? So, this looks like a crack on my screen. So you could lean into that more. And again, if you wanted to lean into, you know, formatting with bolds, underlines, italics, that's something you could do. That's cool. But like that is... Thanks for pointing that out, because I was going to point that out myself. And it's not that there's anything wrong with this. My head, and probably many other readers' heads, will just go to this thought, to this being a mistake in the pattern. And maybe they'll, you know, it is going to be a point where you ask, like, why are these like this? And it could also just be that you presented me a poem that was kind of unfinished, right? So it makes me assume that if there's something that looks out of place, unfortunately my mind goes to maybe that's a mistake or something else unfinished about this poem. And definitely once you have it really solid and you say this is a final version, you know, if I saw this in a poetry collection that was published, I wouldn't have the same inclination to question her and her as much as I would decide to go in and analyze it, right? But, you know, that's just a product of your situation. So that's kind of my spiel with that. So, also just some things like being someone's, you would want an apostrophe there. Like, there's some grammatical things, and your poem, unfortunately, having mistakes, this is the reality of art. And I mean, I know you have mistakes because you told me to change something. Reduces immediately the credibility of your work. It's unavoidable. That's art. So yeah, it's just a note on like the effect of having mistakes, which is interesting. There's nothing wrong with sharing a work in progress, and I think it's really good, right? But it's going to take away, and that just goes to show, I guess, as an example. And if you're ever going to publish work, which I think someday you should, I think you're good at poetry, you know? That just is like an example of why it's important for your stuff to be accurate, you know? And it's interesting, so you acknowledge once, it's pathetic, I'm pathetic, and I really liked this line a lot because, you know, a lot of this is otherwise very accusatory and inflammatory and just like, I'm angry and I hate this person, but you do acknowledge, you know, it's pathetic and I'm pathetic. You could lean into that more, or you could not. You know, it is an artistic statement to everything you do in your piece is an artistic statement, but it does make a different statement to not include that at all. And just have it be like, I'm right, I hate you, I'm mad. And if you don't want to do that, then maybe you lean more into that, yeah, I'm pathetic, and maybe I should get over this. Maybe you shouldn't. I don't know the actual situation, right? But I guess, judging the overall tone of your poem, being very like, aggressive, don't come crawling back, her in all caps, or her in bold, etc., etc. I just want you to acknowledge this. You left me for months and years, you don't call, you just want something. Having one little line that's like, I'm pathetic, is interesting and cool, and it feels like a starting point. But you only engage with it once. And again, we're talking about patterns and threes, and you don't always have to like abide by that rule of three, but it is useful, right? I kind of forgot about this line until I came back and was actually reading through the whole poem, because if you just say, I'm pathetic in one setting, and then go right back to everything else you were doing, the I'm pathetic gets a little bit lost, right? And it feels like an important part of the poem. I mean, it is dead in the middle. Important parts of your poems are like the very start, the very end, and dead in the middle. These are often like going to be the strongest parts of your poems that people are going to focus on the most. So that being said, if we're putting this very important sounding statement in an important part, maybe we delve into it more. Possibly. Does that help? Do you have any other questions? Any other spots that you wanted me to look at? Things that you think I missed? Any whatever? I said about 45 minutes, and that's where we are, and I feel like I've said a good amount to help you. But like, you have cool stuff. You have good writing. I think you do a good job at poetic prose. I don't think you can really do a bad job at poetic prose unless you're really just writing prose and calling it poetic prose, or writing poetry and calling it poetic prose, right? Nothing much, just that I despise this boy. Yeah. I mean, I can tell that. I do wonder why. Like, you don't lean into that very much, in my opinion. I don't hate her or you. Well, maybe I do you, not her. Still thinking about, like you obviously think a lot about this person and have a lot of pent up emotion and anger at the lie, which again, I think talking about those lies in relation to the promise is a good way to like dig into that, right? But I wonder why you even say, well, maybe I do you. You could just say, I don't hate her, I hate you. It's more on the nose. It's very on the nose. But it almost gives me the feeling that, like, if you really despise this person, I think you can be angrier. Like, you have a lot of undertones of anger. You talk about them being the one crawling back. You talk about how you're pathetic for existing in the situation. You're really angry over their lies. You have these strong memories, and this hand still bleeding. It still causes you pain. And I think if like that's, you know, sort of the one thing that you gave as a note, then I would want you to make your poem angrier. More feelings in your poem. Right? This is also your first prose poem. Yeah, I think it's excellent. I don't really write prose poetry, but I think it's cool. I dig it. He used to be my best friend, so I'm soft on him, and that's why I said I'm pathetic. Yeah. Yeah, the running back like a dog waiting for the master. this idea of submission, patheticness, certainly. And I think, since you say that, maybe you lean into, I am pathetic for being nice to you, or for being soft. I should be more angry. If you think you're pathetic for being soft, you probably want the alternative, right? So maybe that's the dichotomy that you want to dig into. You want to dig into the soft and pathetic versus the angry and assertive. You want to dig into the pleading, crying, begging dog versus the master, the I'm not going to let you come crawling back, the, as cruel as it sounds, kicking you to the curb, right? And I think that's a more interesting dynamic, maybe. This idea of like dog and owner, and pathetic versus angry, or submissive to what has happened versus assertive. These are much stronger emotions to put in poetry than hate, if I'm being honest. Hate is a word we use a lot, and hate is a word that sometimes means nothing because of that. And we can say, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, but if I can say, you're like a dog who I want to kick to the curb and tuck their tail and run away from me and never come back, I don't want to care for you, I don't want to provide for you, I'm done with you being in my life. I hate you. You know, that would be a great like out of context clip. Just started at you're a dog. But you see the difference, right? And I think a prose poem gives you the opportunity to talk at length in ways like that. And that might be a way to utilize the form more. I think that's my advice. Dig into that. Dig into the pathetic, the despising. You could do a different metaphor. It doesn't have to be the dog and the owner. Think as though I hate him, as in my hate is going nowhere. Like it means nothing. Like hate does. And I don't hate him that much. Though it does grow over. Exactly. That's the thing. Like look what you're saying. You are going back and forth in this like contradiction of like I hate him but I don't, and he's not here, why should I hate him? Like I hate him more every day, but like I don't hate him, it's not going anywhere. It's this like unheard hate. Like write about that. Take your last message that you sent. Thing is though I hate him as in my hate is going nowhere, like it means nothing like hate does, and I don't hate him that much, though it does grow every day. Growing every day. Festering, bleeding like a wound. It goes nowhere. It goes nowhere like hate does. I mean, you have calls unanswered, someone not talking to you. Though I hate him as in my hate is going nowhere, it means nothing like hate does. Right, and you have this issue of hate meaning nothing. And why am I hating this person? This person is gone and it's not going anywhere, that's pathetic. Like, you put it all in that message in a very beautiful way. And I want more of that message you just sent in chat in this poem. If that makes sense. Does that help? I'm gonna read it again. I'm gonna leave it at that. I think that is maybe as much as I can give you in that regard. brother. His hand touched mine. Hot blood melted our skin into one flesh. Now we were bound forever. Nothing could break us. Except her. I don't hate her. Or you. Well, maybe I do you, but certainly not her. The one who took you from me, left me for months and years, even now, without you. You don't call or write or even try to be my friend unless you want something. Even then I come running like a dog, waiting for his master to return. It's pathetic. I'm pathetic. Still thinking of that boy who put his hand to mine and said, "You will never have to be alone again." How you lie. That's all you do to me now. All you've ever done, most likely. I was just too blinded by the thought of being someone's. I never wanted us to be together. I just wanted you to acknowledge our bond and what we did that day. How you told me, now we are each other's forever. It was probably just another lie, but is it better to live a happy lie or a depressed reality? And when I became too much of a reality, you chose her. You broke our bond and you chose her. So don't come crawling back to me whenever you please, because I know your hand is healed. But mine is still bleeding. Okay, a couple more notes. When I became too much of a reality... Oh, such a banger line. I don't know how I haven't mentioned that yet. That is incredible. I love that. Right? When I became too much of a reality, you chose her. And then being someone's, again, that's kind of that idea if you're talking about the dog, right? Super good. And yeah, like it's really good. I just want more. I mean, I love when you send me your poetry. So that being said, arsonasher69, thank you for submitting. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sending a poem that is personal and vulnerable and a style that you're not used to, something that you're still learning. I know I had a lot of feedback. I often have a lot of feedback for you because, like, you send me a lot of stuff. If I'm being too harsh, I'm sorry. But I think it's maybe just because I see a lot of, like, potential, and there's a lot that can be brought out. And there's a lot, and I maybe haven't acknowledged enough with this poem how much you're already doing and how much emotion you're bringing out and how many incredible moments there are in this poem, right?